Welcome to SPF Talk, the show that brings you the scoop on the SPF and polyurea industries. Hi, I'm Jay Davidson, CEO of Spray Foam Insider. Our topic today is titled SPF Chemistry Makes It a Safe Product. My guest is Dr. George Thompson, President and CEO of Chemical Compliance Systems, Inc. Dr. Thompson has a PhD in toxicology and pharmacology. He has 14 years' experience in industrial hazard and risk assessments, environmental evaluations, and product development. He has published 21 hazardous chemical books, 39 technical research articles, hosted 2 worldwide and 3 national safety health conferences, and has trained over 10,000 employees. He's been an expert witness for legal cases involving SPF. He recently gave a presentation at the 2018 SPFA convention entitled SPF Chemistry Makes It a Safe Product. Welcome, Dr. Thompson.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
You certainly appear to be highly qualified to help us understand how SPF chemistry makes it a safe product. What prompted you to write this particular presentation?
I've been an expert witness in 4 lawsuits against SPF manufacturers, installers, and distributors. And the sources of information for those lawsuits for the plaintiff has always been the internet, where there is misinformation about SPF. And so for those in the industry, I wanted them to understand enough about the chemistry, at least in layman's terms, that they could appreciate that they are installing a safe product, but there are concerns for the employees, their employees, that they need to be protected. And so it was to give a balanced picture based upon the science of chemistry and toxicology.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is certainly good news for the SPF industry. In your presentation, you mentioned that all chemicals can be hazardous, but prudent management and the use to reduce or eliminate the risks. So, in other words, if you use it in ways that are proper and appropriate, you're going to reduce or eliminate your risks. So when we talk about something being toxic, you say that it's really a matter of dosage or how much a person is exposed to a particular substance. Can you talk more about this?
Yes, that's true of anything that's made of chemicals, is that the dose makes the poison. And we're aware of that because if we look at things that we commonly use that have hazards associated with them, and an example are medicines. Medicines are designed to have toxic effects. That's sometimes how they cure. Think of an antibiotic. That's how it cures the disease. But because we control the dose, the frequency that we take the antibiotic, and the duration that we take it, then we control what effect that has. And if we follow the proper procedures, then it prevents and cures disease. And with SPF, it's the same thing. It's the dose that makes the poison. So if you're looking at side A, you want to be very cautious with that, the employees that work with it, because that has a hazard associated with it. But when you go to the far extreme and you have the cured SPF article after 24 or 48 hours, then that risk is gone.
Okay, that's fascinating. That is information I think anybody in the SPF industry should understand.
Well, it also applies to foods we eat. There are poisons in foods. Arsenic, for example, is in potatoes. But because it's in very small concentrations and we vary our diet, it doesn't poison us. Mm-hmm. But if we took it in high doses, then it would be very much a negative effect on our nutrition and health.
Okay, so it's the same idea with SPF. If used correctly and you understand how to educate your customer, then you should be fine.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And according to your presentation, you said that most legal cases against SPF were initiated because of complaints surrounding the installation of SPF. So what are the issues surrounding the installation process that become a legal issue?
Well, there's a hierarchy of what I call root causes. When I do expert witness work, I do a root cause analysis, and I say, what is the original complaint? What are the health effects that are being alleged? And as you track down in the tiers, what was it that could have caused those? And when I first got involved with these legal cases with SPF, what I found as I worked down to the root cause is that, in fact, there wasn't anything in the chemistry that could cause that. But if there was a fault, it would routinely be that it wasn't installed properly, which gets to the installer and the original raw materials that were used. So it's important, for example, that the consumer is not around during the installation. That's the easiest way to make sure they're not exposed, and therefore the dose is zero. They can't be exposed to a hazardous or a toxic level if they're not there. And then the worker, of course, has to be properly suited up in personal protective equipment so that he's not exposed.
Okay. All right. So what are some things that you think contractors should do to protect themselves against legal action from a customer?
The contractor that does the actual installation will get most of his technical information from the manufacturer. And so it's important that the manufacturer first does prudent work in the sense that they've evaluated all of the aspects in the SPF life cycle from side A to B to the curing SPF to the cured SPF. And so if they have that information analyzed and reports provided to the distributors and installers and safety data sheets for the entire system, then the installer needs to be trained and conscious of that information. But I would one of the things that I recommend to installers is that they avoid any potential customer that has asthma, known chemical sensitivities, or COPD, breathing problems. Because all of the cases that I've been involved with are people that fall in one of those categories. And so if that's the first rule. The second rule is that there are people that are doing the installation and the sales staff are properly trained so that they understand the hazards, the risks, and the non-risks with SPF, and they can properly explain that to their potential customers.
Yes, because sometimes they're the first line of communication.
Absolutely. You don't want the different expectations from the customer versus the installer or his salesman. And then, in addition, it's very important that the installers follow proper procedures, maintain detailed records, including photographs, and monitor the project after the installation to make sure that it has all of the appearances of being proper.
Well, I know a few contractors who actually have a document that they have their customers sign that says that they have read and understand that it's important for them to vacate the premises for either 24 to 48 hours, and they have that customer sign it. What do you think about that?
That's absolutely excellent. That's one of the strong pieces of evidence that would protect the whole chain of command, the installer, the distributor, and the manufacturer in a lawsuit, is that if a customer signed that, that's strong evidence that they knew and they were properly informed. But the cases that I've been involved with didn't have that. So it is one of the early indications that there is a potential for a lawsuit. So if you take the two, you take a potential customer who has sensitivity, say has asthma, existing asthma, and you don't tell him about the effects, or even if you do tell him about the effects, potential effects, and you don't document it, they're liable to take you to court and say, oh, they didn't tell me.
Yeah. So a simple piece of paper could solve a lot.
Yes, absolutely could.
Okay. Now, what can contractors do to protect themselves legally? Let's say an employee develops a sensitivity to SPF. What's some things that the contractor could plan or do in advance to dissuade that possibility?
Well, one of the things that's critical when we talk about SPF is what do we mean by that? And in a lawsuit, the plaintiff, the homeowner, is going to mean when they use the term SPF, they almost always mean the A side,
Mm-hmm.
because that's the most hazardous component.
Okay.
But if a customer is not there during the installation, they're never exposed to the A side.
Oh.
So we have to be careful here what language we're using, because there is an A side and a B side, a curing SPF and a cured SPF. When we talk about SPF in the industry, we're talking about the finished cured SPF.
Oh, okay.
We're not talking about the A side, or we're not
Mhm.
talking about the B side, because we use those terms to talk about the components that go into making SPF. And there's tremendous confusion in the industry, not in the industry, but in the customer marketplace, about what is SPF. And if you go on the internet
Mm-hmm.
and you look up SPF, you'll find that all of the negative stuff is about the A side. Now, that's also the side that workers have to be careful of, because they can become sensitized if they don't wear the proper personal protective equipment and the air-supplied respirators and keep themselves from being exposed. Then they can become sensitized to that, and that's a lifelong sensitization. And so it's critical that the workers protect themselves and that they make sure that the customer is not present when this stuff is being installed, so that there is zero exposure.
Right. So, yeah. So if a company is putting all the proper safety into effect, and they're documenting things, they should not have an issue. And you brought up a very good point that I want to emphasize a little more. You mentioned the difference between cured and curing. So I think we need, for our listeners anyway, that we need to distinguish the difference between curing and cured.
That's a very good point. So when the installer is shooting the mist of the mixture into the wall or the ceiling roof, applying it, it's going on there as a reacting mixture, and it actually swells up. And that swelling up is a chemical reaction where there are air bubbles, if you will, or some form of gas that's making the cells in the SPF. But after a few minutes, that swelling stops. But there are still chemical reactions going on for the next few hours. It could be 1 or 2 or 3 hours. And the curing process continues. And think of this now as, let's say it's 2 or 3 inches thick. There are reactions going still at the base of that installation, when the surface of it has already got a film on it and you can touch it and it doesn't stick to you. You know those reactions are completed. But as you move into the depth of the SPF, the reactions are continuing. And that's partly why you wait for the homeowner to come back in 24 or 48 hours, so that the full depth of that, the reactions have stopped. So that the curing SPF is still having reactions ongoing. And there are more chemical constituents in curing SPF than there are in the cured SPF, where reactions have stopped.
So once the product is cured, then essentially the chemical reaction stops, and it's the A side at that point and the B side as well. Once they're cured, there's no residual. There's nothing that anybody could come in contact with that would be considered toxic in any way.
No, the way that it works is that the A side reacts with the B side.
Yes.
And forms this curing or cured SPF. And so in that context, when you have the cured SPF, it's a solid material. Think of it as a plastic, or think of it as the sponge that you use in the kitchen to wash dishes. It's a solid, just like the sponge. And so in that context, when you touch the surface of it, there is no reaction there. But there are cells in it. They're small, in some cases microscopic cells if it's closed cell. And if you cut into it, then those cells can have some residual chemicals in them, but they can't come out through the plastic. Or if they come out, it's at such a low rate you can't detect it.
Okay.
And so it's not of any concern. But the surface of it is completely safe to touch, and much of the components inside are at such low concentration because of these microscopic holes. There's not much chemical in there. And most all of the chemicals have reacted to make that plastic, what we call SPF or spray polyurethane foam.
Oh, thank you for that. Yes. It reminds me of if you were talking about, say, a water molecule or H2O, which is comprised of hydrogen and oxygen. You wouldn't want to drink a glass of hydrogen gas, but once it's combined with the oxygen, it's perfectly safe to drink, and we all drink it every day.
Yes, and in the context of the reactions to make water with the hydrogen and oxygen and the water, those are three different chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
So hydrogen isn't water and oxygen isn't water, but when you chemically react them, you make water, which is totally different and has totally different effects.
Okay.
That's same thing is true with side A and side B. They are two different mixtures of chemicals. When you put those two mixtures together, what comes out as SPF is a totally different product.
Okay. All right. So now what is your stance on the B-side chemical just as itself? We've talked a lot about the iso or the A side. What about the B side?
The B side by nature is less concerned than the A side.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the chemicals that are used and their effects as pure chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
So there's significantly less concern on the B side than there is on the A side.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some components in the B side that can cause irritation kinds of effects, coughing, wheezing things if you're exposed to them, and particularly in the manufacture of the B side, where you're working with concentrated things like amines. But those materials are retained in the SPF cells at such small microscopic levels that, one, they don't escape out of the cells after the curing process is completed, and two, the amounts that are there are so low that they wouldn't cause adverse health effects.
Very good. All right. Thank you for that. So what is the best way for companies to document that they have done all the things that they should be doing to protect themselves?
Well, the very first thing they do before they even get a customer is that they need to train their installers and sales staff.
Mm-hmm.
They need to understand something about the chemistry. The installers need to understand it because they need to protect themselves. Both of them need to understand it so they can explain it to the customer,
mm-hmm.
the salesman in closing the deal, and the installer in the process of doing the installation. They want to be knowledgeable enough that they can keep the customers from being exposed.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the way they do that is make sure they have the safety data sheets from the manufacturer on each of these components so they can refer to them or they can refer the customer to them.
Mm-hmm.
They need to maintain what they have done with pictures.
Mm-hmm.
So because if you go to a lawsuit, the picture's worth 1,000 words literally in court. And then they need these detailed records, as you indicated. If they've got a signed document from the homeowner
mm-hmm.
that they recognize they're not supposed to be in the home for at least 24 or 48 hours, and the process also indicates that they have had the chemistry explained to them in layman's terms,
mm-hmm.
that between the pictures and the signed documents, they're very, very effective. Mm-hmm. But the installers also need to annually monitor their employees for any potential health effects. And in all cases, I recommend that they carry liability insurance for those unfortunate circumstances where lawsuits evolve, because they can be very expensive.
Well, I think that everything you're telling our listeners today is so crucial and critical and can just save them so much, in headaches, potential loss. I just think that this is information that everybody should know. How important are SPF certifications in protecting oneself legally?
Well, in almost every case, the first question the plaintiff's attorney, the customer's attorney, is going to ask the installer when they're deposed, when they're questioned,
mm-hmm.
is, are you certified? That's the very first question.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to want to see the certification.
Mm-hmm.
Who gave it, and they'll ask them detailed questions about what was in the certification course, because what they're trying to do in front of the judge or jury is to let the jury see whether this installer knows what he's talking about.
Yes.
And so that's the purpose of the certification training courses, is to make them knowledgeable so that they can protect themselves and their customers. But that's that certification is the first document that they're going to ask for, and it's really strengthened if the sales staff, when they're interviewed, because they will be the resident or the customer is going to say, "Oh, they didn't tell me any of this stuff."
Uh-huh.
But if they have the signed document, and the salesman, when he's deposed, can say, "Here's all the stuff I was certified in,
Mm-hmm.
and I told the customer," then it really undermines the inherent financial risk for the employer.
Yes, and I also want to clarify, it isn't just certifications or maybe accreditations. While those are important, it could also be documented training or other types of education that are documented as well. Something like that kind of document should be adequate as well.
It would be adequate, but what really comes across is that, remember, each of these participants in an installation, so that can be the installer and his assistant, the sales staff, the project manager,
Mm-hmm.
all of the levels in this process are going to be deposed
Mm-hmm.
by the plaintiff's attorney,
Mm.
including the distributor and the manufacturer. They will have people who are deposed. And so it's important in those depositions that when the attorneys ask detailed questions, think about it as chemistry
Mm-hmm.
or health effects or protection processes with signage or documentation that the communications were given to the customer, all of that stuff becomes evidence in the court.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more certifications that are had in that chain within the whole industry, then the easier it is to win the cases.
Oh, very good. Okay. So your experiences in court, let's say in a lawsuit, how do you demonstrate that SPF chemistry makes it a safe product? I know that you have some extensive PowerPoint presentations, and you have tried to get the word out in a number of ways. And this could be something that you would want people to come to your website to learn more about. I'm just not sure how deep of a question I'm asking, so I don't know how you might want to respond to this right now.
Well, first of all, it's important that everybody in the business, including the customer, understands what we mean by SPF.
Mm-hmm.
And within that concept of spray polyurethane foam, there's an A side, there's a B side, there's curing SPF, where reactions are still taking place, and there's cured SPF.
Mm-hmm.
And what the customer is exposed to, if they're not coming in within 24 or 48 hours, is the cured SPF.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's critical that chemistry is understood. And when I have participated as an expert on these lawsuits, I simply keep focusing, because what the opposing attorney is trying to do is talk about the dangers of A side.
Ah, uh-huh.
But that's not what the customer is exposed to. The customer is exposed to the cured SPF.
Oh.
And there is no
Mm-hmm.
A side left at that point.
Yes, because
And
it's
so
reacted.
When you
Yeah.
Yes. So when you communicate that chemistry to a judge or jury, they can understand the importance of semantics here in the language of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very easy to prove in a court of law that cured SPF is safe.
Thank you.
Particularly,
Uh-huh.
particularly when you acknowledge that the A side's hazardous, which it is. It's hazardous to anybody that's exposed to it, whether it's a worker or the resident. So you don't want those people exposed. The worker wears complete personal protective equipment.
Mm-hmm.
The resident shouldn't be there when there's any SPF, any A side, and that usually is gone within the first 1 to 3 hours. They
Mm-hmm.
can't detect it anymore. So
Okay.
the chemistry speaks for itself, but you have to focus on the chemistry, whether you're talking about making SPF safe for the workers, or you're talking about making SPF safe for the residents of the
Mm-hmm.
homeowner.
Mm-hmm.
It's about making sure the chemistry is done properly and all procedures are properly followed by all parties.
Thank you. Dr. Thompson, this has been an absolutely fascinating topic, and I'm sure tremendously worthwhile to everyone connected with the SPF industry. If people want to know more, how can they contact you?
Well, I can be reached by phone at 973-663-2148, They can check out our website at www.chemply.com, or they can email me at George Thompson with no dot at chemply.com. And I want to emphasize that that when you plot on a graph the hazards of the A side to the SPF article across this life cycle, it is a decreasing curve. So that as you move through the life cycle of SPF, it gets increasingly safe. And that's a message that needs to be taught to all of the employees in an organization, but it also needs to be expressed to the customers. And they can understand it and will accept it when they see just how safe SPF, cured SPF actually is.
Well, I really appreciate that clarification, and I'm sure our listeners do as well. Dr. Thompson, thank you so much for joining us today and helping us understand how SPF chemistry makes it a safe product. And that website, again, is www.chemply.com. Thanks for listening to SPF Talk. This is Jay Davidson, CEO of Spray Foam and Cider, the show that cuts through the jargon, gets to the point, and saves you time and money. If you would like to be a guest on our show, email us at info@sprayfoaminsider.com.